Sienna Hayes had stopped believing in second chances 3 years ago, right around the time her botanical survey team had been stranded on Kepler 442b for 6 weeks with dwindling supplies. She'd gotten everyone home alive, barely, but the nightmares hadn't stopped, which made it particularly ironic that she was now staring at a holographic invitation to what the Galactic Council cheerfully called the Survival Summit, and what everyone else in the universe apparently called the Death World. Games. You're joking, she said flatly, her green eyes scanning the alien script that helpfully translated itself into English. This has to be a prank. Across the cramped briefing room in the Earth Coalition's orbital station, a man with dark hair and startlingly blue eyes laughed. The sound was warm and genuine, completely at odds with the gravity of the situation. Oh, I assure you, it's devastatingly real. I've spent the last 6 hours translating the fine print, and yes, we've been cordially invited to attend a competition on a planet where the rain is acidic, the plants are carnivorous, and the other competitors consider humans something between a joke and an appetizer. Sienna turned to face him properly for the first time since entering the room. Dante Volkov, the dossier had said, linguistics specialist, fluent in 17 human languages, and already proficient in 3 alien dialects, despite first contact happening only 5 years ago. The file had mentioned his academic credentials, but had somehow failed to mention the roguish smile or the way his voice carried traces of at least 4 different Earth accents, as if he'd never quite settled on where he belonged. And you think this is funny? She asked, though she felt her own lips twitching despite herself. I think, Dante said, standing and walking closer, that humor is the only appropriate response to cosmic absurdity. We're a species that still can't agree on whether pineapple belongs on pizza, and somehow we've been classified as a death world species by aliens who consider Earth a paradise vacation spot. If that's not funny, I don't know what is. People are going to die, Sienna pointed out, but her tone had softened. There was something about his energy that made it hard to stay entirely cynical. The survival rate for these summits is apparently 60%. And that's for species that evolved on worlds where the weather actively tries to kill you. 60%? Dante's eyebrows rose. That's better odds than my last relationship. Before Sienna could respond, the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. 2 more people entered, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop several degrees with the sudden weight of reality. Cale Quinn was a compact man with oil-stained hands and sharp eyes that constantly evaluated his surroundings for problems to solve. His sister Vesper was taller, with the same dark hair but a softer expression that Sienna immediately distrusted people who smiled that easily usually had something to hide. Tell me you've found a way to decline this invitation without starting an intergalactic incident, Cale said without preamble, already moving toward the holographic display to examine the technical specifications of Vexillor Prime. No such luck, Dante replied cheerfully. But look on the bright side. When was the last time Earth got invited to anything? The Galactic Council usually treats us like children at the adults' table. There's a reason for that, Vesper said quietly, her fingers dancing across her datapad. We're the new kids. 5 years since first contact, and we're still figuring out basic trade agreements. This invitation is either a catastrophic computer error or someone's idea of a very dark joke. Sienna studied the 3 people she'd apparently be risking her life with. The file had said they were the best Earth had to offer for this particular brand of insanity survivors. Specialists, people with nothing to lose or everything to prove. She wondered which category she fell into. Both, probably. The Coalition isn't forcing anyone, she said, repeating what she'd been told 3 hours ago. We can decline. They'll apologize for the clerical error. Earth will be embarrassed for about 6 months, and life goes on. But you're not going to decline, Dante said. It wasn't a question. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. As if he could see past the professional competence she wore like armor straight through to the part of her that still woke up screaming about Kepler 442b. "No," Sienna admitted. "I'm not." "Why not?" Vesper asked, genuinely curious rather than challenging. Sienna considered lying, offering one of the noble reasons she'd rehearsed, representing humanity, proving Earth's worth, scientific opportunity. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "Because 3 years ago, I made decisions that I still don't know were right. People trusted me, and I got them home, but barely. Every day since then has felt like borrowed time. This feels like a chance to either prove I'm actually good at this, or double quotes," she trailed off. "Or find out you're not, in a way that's permanent and resolves the question forever," Dante finished softly. The humor had drained from his voice, replaced by something raw and understanding. "Yeah, I know that feeling." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the orbital station's recycled air felt charged with recognition. Whatever Dante's file had said about his credentials, Sienna suddenly knew there was a much more important story it hadn't told. Cale cleared his throat. "Well, this is getting emotionally vulnerable faster than I expected. Can we focus on the part where we're supposed to survive 7 days on a planet designated as Class 9 hazardous?" "Class 9 out of 10, Vesper added helpfully. 10 being incompatible with carbon-based life. Fantastic, Sienna muttered. But she was already moving toward the display, her mind shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her team alive on Kepler 442b. "Okay, if we're doing this, we do it smart. What do we know about Vexler Prime?" Dante joined her at the display, standing close enough that she could smell whatever cologne he wore, something that reminded her inexplicably of old books and storm-washed air. Atmospheric composition is breathable but hostile. High sulfur content, temperature extremes, and the local fauna apparently evolved with the general philosophy that anything not currently eating you is merely waiting for a better opportunity. "The plant life is equally cheerful," Vesper said, pulling up a botanical survey. "Carnivorous, toxic, and in some cases, mobile. There are at least 40 documented species that actively hunt prey. And we'll be competing against species that evolved on worse worlds than this," Cale added, his expression grim. "The Sharikai from a high-gravity ice world. The Vexner, who breathe methane and consider our oxygen atmosphere poison. The Draknir, who are basically sentient armored tanks. So we're outmatched in every physical category," Sienna summarized. "Strength, durability, environmental adaptation." "Yep," Dante agreed, but that irrepressible smile was creeping back. "Which means we'll have to be smarter, more adaptable, and significantly more stubborn than everything trying to kill us. Fortunately, being stubbornly creative in the face of certain death is basically humanity's species specialty." Despite everything, Sienna found herself smiling back. "You really think we can do this?" "I think we're going to die trying," Dante said honestly. "But I also think that if I'm going to die, I'd rather do it doing something spectacular than fading away in some quiet, safe way. And I think you feel the same way, or you wouldn't be here." He was right, damn him. Sienna had spent 3 years playing it safe, taking assignments that couldn't possibly recreate her worst nightmares. And she'd been miserable every single day. At least this way, if she failed, it would be while attempting something impossible rather than merely difficult. "Okay," she said, and felt the decision settle into her bones like an old familiar weight. "We're going to need a plan." "Multiple plans," Cale corrected. "And backup plans for when those plans inevitably fall apart." "I'll start working on our equipment loadout," Vesper offered. "We're allowed standard survival gear, which by human standards is pretty extensive." "And I," Dante said, his eyes never leaving Sienna's face, We'll make sure we understand exactly what we're getting into. No surprises. Everything about this is a surprise, Sienna pointed out. Then let's make sure we're the surprising ones, Dante replied. Over the next 2 weeks, Sienna discovered that preparation for certain death involved a staggering amount of paperwork, equipment testing, and awkward interviews with Earth media, who couldn't decide if they were heroes or idiots. She also discovered that Dante Volkov was simultaneously the most frustrating and most compelling person she'd ever met. He had an infuriating habit of making jokes at entirely inappropriate moments, could somehow find humor in their repeatedly grim briefings about Vexler Prime's hazards, and seemed constitutionally incapable of taking anything seriously for more than 5 consecutive minutes. And yet, when she reviewed his research on the competing species, his linguistic analysis of potential threats, his careful documentation of every possible advantage they might leverage, she realized the humor was camouflage for a mind that never stopped working. "You hide behind the jokes," she said one evening, finding him alone in the observation deck, staring at Earth's curve against the darkness. "Is it hiding if everyone can see what I'm doing?" Dante asked, but he didn't deny it. "Why do you do it?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Sienna thought he might not answer. Then, "Because if I stop laughing, I start thinking about all the things I've lost. And that's not useful for anyone, least of all me." Sienna moved to stand beside him, their reflections ghostly in the reinforced glass. "What did you lose?" "Same thing you lost," Dante said softly. "The certainty that I'm good enough. That when things go wrong, not if, when I'll make the right call. 3 years ago, you said. For me, it was 5. A diplomatic mission that went sideways. People died because I translated something wrong, misunderstood a cultural nuance. It was an accident, but that doesn't matter to the families who lost someone. So this is your redemption," Sienna said. "Or my ending," Dante agreed. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light, his face was stripped of all its usual playfulness. Either way, it felt better than the alternative. They stood there, 2 people running toward danger, because somehow it felt more honest than running away, and something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet. They were still strangers, really, held together by circumstance and shared damage. But possibility. The suggestion that maybe they weren't alone in this particular brand of self-destructive hope. "We should get some sleep," Sienna said finally. "Transport leaves in 6 hours. Sleep is for people not about to embark on a suicide mission," Dante replied, but he was smiling again. And this time Sienna understood it was a gift his way of carrying them both back from the edge. Then coffee, she decided, and go over the environmental protocols one more time. "Now you're speaking my language," Dante said. "Though technically, I speak 43 languages. So that's not saying much." As they walked together toward the station's galley, Sienna realized she was no longer dreading the transport to Vexler Prime. She was still terrified, still uncertain, still carrying the weight of past failures like stones in her pockets. But for the first time in 3 years, she was also curious about tomorrow, about what impossible things they might accomplish, about the man walking beside her, whose humor masked depths she was only beginning to understand. The universe had invited humanity to prove itself among the star's deadliest species. And Sienna Hayes, who had stopped believing in second chances, suddenly wondered if maybe that's exactly what this was. The transport ship shuddered as it pierced Vexler Prime's atmosphere, and Sienna's stomach lurched in a way that had nothing to do with turbulence. Through the viewport, the planet revealed itself in layers of menace clouds the color of old bruises, lightning that flickered green and violet, and below it all, a landscape that looked like something from a fever dream. "Well?" Dante said from the seat beside her, his knuckles white on the armrests, despite his casual tone. It's not worse than the brochure promised. That's something. The brochure promised certain death, Vesper pointed out from across the cramped passenger bay. She'd been remarkably calm throughout the journey. Though Sienna noticed, she kept checking and rechecking her equipment harness. Then we're right on schedule, Cale muttered, his eyes fixed on a datapad showing real-time atmospheric readings. Sulfur dioxide levels are spiking. The acid rain they mentioned? It's not rain. It's more like a constant acidic mist with occasional downpours that could strip paint off a hull. The transport lurched again, harder this time, and Sienna instinctively reached out. Her hand found Dante's, and he squeezed back without hesitation or comment. It was purely practical. She told herself two people steadying each other through rough conditions. The fact that his hand was warm and surprisingly calloused, that he didn't let go even when the turbulence settled, was irrelevant. "Attention, competitors," a synthetic voice announced in clipped Galactic Standard. "We are approaching the deployment zone. You will disembark in assigned sectors. Standard competition rules apply survival for 7 planetary rotations. No permanent modifications to the planet's ecosystem. Violence between teams discouraged but not prohibited. May fortune favor the resilient." "Discouraged but not prohibited," Dante repeated. "That's wonderfully vague. It means we're fair game if someone decides we're worth the effort to kill," Sienna translated. She'd studied the previous summit recordings obsessively. But most species focus on the planet's challenges rather than each other. The real threat comes from the transport touched down with a bone-jarring impact that cut off her words. The loading ramp dropped, and Vexler Prime's atmosphere rushed in even through their breathing filters, a sharp chemical tang that made Sienna's eyes water. "Move quickly," Cale urged. "We need to establish position before the other teams start claiming territory." They descended the ramp into a world that seemed designed by a committee of sadists. The ground beneath their boots was dark volcanic rock, still warm enough that Sienna could feel heat through her reinforced soles. The sky overhead churned with clouds that occasionally parted to reveal twin suns, both smaller and redder than Earth's sun. The light they cast made everything look vaguely wrong, as if the world existed slightly out of phase with reality. But what caught Sienna's attention were the other team's dot about 50 meters away. A group of massive creatures were disembarking from their own transport. They stood at least 9 feet tall, covered in what looked like chitinous armor plates, with 4 arms and heads shaped like brutal wedges. Their eyes, multiple sets per head, glowed with a faint amber light. "Draknir," Dante breathed, consulting the species database on his wrist display. "Gravity on their homeworld is 3 times Earth standard. They're essentially living tanks." "Don't stare," Sienna warned, but it was too late. One of the Draknir had noticed them and was pointing with one of its 4 arms. The gesture was followed by a sound that might have been laughter, a grinding, crunching noise that made Sienna's teeth ache. "They think we're funny," Vesper said unnecessarily. "Let them," Sienna replied, already scanning the landscape for defensible positions. "We're not here to impress them. We're here to survive." They moved away from the landing zone, Cale taking point with his scanner while Vesper watched their rear. Sienna found herself walking beside Dante, who seemed more interested in the bizarre vegetation than in watching for threats. "These are remarkable," he murmured, gesturing to what looked like trees, except their bark pulsed rhythmically, and their branches ended in structures that resembled mouths more than leaves. The botanical surveys didn't do them justice. "They're called spine snares," Sienna said, having memorized every dangerous species they might encounter. "Those mouth structures? They snap shut on anything that gets close. The trees digest prey over several weeks." "Romantic," Dante said, but his eyes were serious when he looked at her. "You really did your homework." "Last time I didn't prepare enough. People almost died." I'm not making that mistake again. Before Dante could respond, Cale held up a fist, the universal signal to stop. We've got company, he said quietly. 3 o'clock, about 30 meters out. Sienna turned carefully and felt her breath catch. Moving through the twisted vegetation with an eerie grace was something that looked like it had been assembled from crystal and starlight. It stood on 2 legs, but moved with a fluidity that suggested its joints worked differently than human ones. Its skin, if it could be called skin, seemed to shimmer between solid and translucent, reflecting the strange light in prismatic patterns. Sherry Kai, Dante whispered. One of the favorites to win. Their homeworld has gravity twice Earth's and temperatures that would freeze nitrogen solid. The crystalline being noticed them and changed direction, moving closer with movements that reminded Sienna of flowing water. As it approached, she realized it was carrying no visible weapons, wearing no equipment harness like the Dracnir. It didn't need to. The being itself was a weapon, every line of its body suggesting lethal efficiency. It stopped about 5 meters away, regarding them with eyes that looked like chips of violet ice. When it spoke, the words came through a translation device that hung in the air like jewelry made of light. Humans, the Sharikai said, its voice like wind chimes. I am Nerix of the Ice Gardens. I watched your species' introduction to the Galactic Council. You are small, fragile. Your world is soft and kind. Why are you here? There was no hostility in the question, only genuine curiosity. Sienna stepped forward, very aware of Dante tensing beside her, ready to intervene if needed. We were invited, she said simply. And humans don't decline challenges. Nerix tilted its head in a gesture that might have been amusement. Admirable. Foolish, but admirable. I have studied your species in preparation. You are resourceful, I think. Adaptable. These are valuable traits. Thank you, Sienna said, uncertain if she was being complimented or assessed as prey. I will watch your progress with interest, Nerix said. If you survive the first rotation, perhaps we will speak again. I would learn more about the species that lives on Paradise and yet chooses to walk through hell. With that, the Sharikai turned and flowed back into the vegetation, disappearing with unsettling speed. That was weird, right? Vesper said after a moment. That was a weird interaction. That was an apex predator deciding we're more interesting alive than dead, Cale replied. For now, let's not waste the opportunity. They continued moving, eventually finding a location that met their criteria: rocky overhang that provided shelter from above, with good sight lines in 3 directions and only one easily defensible approach. It was adjacent to what passed for a water source on Vexler Prime, a stream of liquid that was technically water but mixed, with enough dissolved minerals to make it look like molten opal. Home sweet home, Dante said, already unpacking equipment. Though I'm not sure what the property values are like in this neighborhood. Probably terrible, Sienna replied, but she was smiling despite herself. There was something about Dante's relentless optimism that made even this nightmarish landscape feel slightly less overwhelming. They worked through the afternoon of Vexler Prime's first day, establishing their camp with practiced efficiency. Cale rigged sensors and basic defensive systems. Vesper set up their water purification and atmospheric processors. Sienna cataloged the immediate environment, identifying threats and resources. And Dante, surprisingly, revealed himself to be skilled at construction, assembling their shelter with quick, confident movements. Hidden talents? Sienna asked, watching him work. I spent 2 years on a colony ship, Dante explained, not looking up from his task. When you're building habitats in space, you learn pretty quickly that sloppy construction means everyone dies. It's motivating. You never mentioned that in your file. My file, Dante said, finally meeting her eyes, leaves out a lot of things. Before Sienna could pursue that intriguing statement, The temperature suddenly dropped 10 degrees. The mist that had been a constant presence thickened into something heavier, and the first drops of acid rain began to fall with soft hissing sounds where they struck stone. "Inside," Cale ordered. "Now." They sealed themselves in the shelter as the rain intensified. Through the transparent panels Vesper had installed, they watched Vexler Prime transform into something even more hostile. The acid rain fell in sheets, and where it touched the vegetation, the plants began to glow with bioluminescent reactions. The effect was bizarrely beautiful. The entire landscape lit up in shades of blue and green and violet, as if the world itself had become a toxic constellation. "First night on a death world," Vesper said softly. "This is really happening." "We made it through day 1, Cale pointed out. "That's already better than some teams." He gestured to their display, which showed a feed from the Galactic Council's monitoring system. Teams were marked as colored dots on a map, and already 3 dots had turned gray eliminated. Sienna didn't ask what eliminated meant. She didn't want to know. "We should eat," she said instead, pulling out their ration packs, "and set a watch schedule." They ate in companionable silence, too tired for much conversation. But as the others began settling in for sleep, Sienna found herself unable to relax. She volunteered for first watch and positioned herself near the transparent panel, watching the acid rain paint abstract patterns in bioluminescence. She didn't hear Dante approach, but suddenly he was there, settling beside her with 2 cups of something that smelled vaguely like coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, accepting the cup gratefully. "Sleep is for people who aren't having existential crises," Dante replied. "Besides, I figured you could use the company. First watches are always the worst, too much time to think." "Is that experience talking? Colony ship, remember? I pulled a lot of watches. You learn pretty quickly that the human brain is not designed for 3 a.m. contemplation while surrounded by vacuum." They sat in silence for a while, watching the alien rain. Finally, Sienna said, "Tell me something real. Not the jokes, not the deflection. Something true." Dante was quiet for so long that Sienna thought he might not answer. Then, "I'm terrified. Not of dying, that's almost abstract, too big to really process. But I'm terrified that I'll fail again, that I'll make a wrong call, misunderstand something crucial, and someone I care about will pay the price." "The diplomatic mission," Sienna said. 5 years ago. Her name was Isabella," Dante said softly. "The woman who died because I mistranslated a threat as a greeting. She was brilliant, funny, kind. We were ... close. And I got her killed because I was careless, because I assumed I understood when I didn't." Sienna felt something in her chest tighten. "That's why you're here. Why you really volunteered." "I told myself it was about redemption, about proving I could still be useful. But honestly, part of me thinks if I can survive this, if I can keep people alive through something this impossible, then maybe I wasn't completely useless 5 years ago. Or maybe I'll die trying, and either way, the question gets answered." "That's bleak," Sienna said. "You're one to talk. Prove I'm actually good at this, or find out in a way that's permanent. Your words, Sienna." "Fair point," she conceded. They sat with that shared darkness between them for a moment. Then Sienna said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Not because of whatever happened 5 years ago, but because right now, in this moment, you're exactly the person I want watching my back." Dante turned to look at her, and in the bioluminescent light filtering through the acid rain, his eyes were impossibly blue. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." "Then you need better friends," Sienna replied. But she was smiling. "I'm working on it," Dante said. And somehow they had moved closer together, close enough that Sienna could feel the warmth of him in the shelter's recycled air, The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Kale's voice cut through it. If you two are done having a moment, we've got movement on the perimeter sensors. They sprang apart, both reaching for weapons as Kale pulled up the sensor display. Several heat signatures were approaching their position, moving with a coordinated pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose. How many? Sienna asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 6 contacts, coming from the east. Moving slowly, deliberately. They're being cautious. Draknir? Vesper guessed, joining them. Signature's wrong, Kale said. These are smaller, but there's something odd about their heat distribution. It's like they're running cooler than the environment. Through the shelter's panels, they could see shapes moving in the bioluminescent rain. Not the massive forms of the Draknir, but something sleeker, with too many limbs that moved in unsettling synchronization. Native predators, Sienna realized. Pack hunters. I saw them in the briefing materials. They're called rift stalkers. Ambush predators that hunt in coordinated groups. Fantastic, Dante muttered. And here I thought our biggest problem would be other competitors. The stalkers circled their position, testing the perimeter, looking for weaknesses. Kale activated their defensive systems basic, sonic deterrence and light barriers designed to confuse and discourage rather than harm. For several tense minutes, they waited. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the stalkers withdrew, melting back into the glowing rain. They'll be back, Sienna said. They were learning our defenses. Next time they'll know what to expect. Then we change the defenses, Kale said. Keep them guessing. Or, Dante suggested, we figure out what they're actually after. Pack hunters don't waste energy on prey. It's too difficult. They were testing us, which means they think we might be worth the effort. Why? Our food supplies, Vesper said. They probably smell the rations. Or they're curious about the new prey in their territory. Either way, we need to be ready, Sienna said. Double watches from now on. No one goes outside the shelter alone. They reorganized their watch schedule, and eventually the others settled back into uneasy sleep. But Sienna found herself still sitting beside Dante, neither of them quite ready to separate after what had almost happened before the interruption. Rain check? Dante finally said quietly, and it took Sienna a moment to understand. He wasn't talking about the acid rain outside. Yeah, she replied. Rain check. But she didn't move away, and neither did he. And they finished the watch, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, a point of warmth in the hostile night. And if their hands somehow found each other in the darkness, if fingers intertwined and held on like lifelines, well, that was just practical. 2 people keeping each other grounded through the long hours. Until dawn. When morning came, such as it was on a world with blood-red suns and acid rain, Sienna woke to find herself leaning against Dante's shoulder, his head resting against hers. Across the shelter, Vesper was pretending very hard not to notice, though the small smile on her face gave her away. We survived night 1, Kale announced, checking the monitoring feed. And we're down to 73 active teams out of an initial 85. The Draknir lost 2 of their 6 members to something called a magma serpent. The Vexener are doing well, naturally. And Nerix, that Sherikai, is currently leading in survival points. Survival points? Sienna asked, carefully extracting herself from Dante's warmth. Apparently, the Council scores teams based on challenges overcome and threats survived. It's not just about lasting 7 days. It's about demonstrating capability. Kale's expression darkened. We're currently ranked dead last. The betting pools have us eliminated by day 3. Then we'd better prove them wrong, Dante said, stretching and somehow making even that look graceful. What's the plan for today? Sienna looked at her team, tired, scared, but still functioning, still together. Outside, Vexler Prime waited with countless ways to kill them. But inside this shelter, they had something most of the other competitors didn't. Each other, and a stubborn human refusal to accept inevitable failure. "We survive," she said simply. "And we show the galaxy what humans can do when we're too stubborn to quit." "Best plan I've heard all day," Dante replied, his eyes meeting hers with warmth that had nothing to do with Vexler Prime's twin suns. "Let's go be surprisingly resilient." As they prepared to face day 2, Sienna realized that somewhere between Earth and this nightmare planet, between shared trauma and shared hope, something had shifted. She wasn't alone in this anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to keep them all alive. The third day on Vexler Prime began with screaming, not human screaming, though Sienna's heart leapt into her throat before she realized that but something else entirely. A sound that started low and built into a shriek that seemed to vibrate through the volcanic rock itself, setting her teeth on edge and making the water in their purification tanks ripple in concentric circles. "What the hell is that?" Vesper asked, pressing her hands over her ears even through the shelter's sound dampening. Cale was already at the monitoring station, his face pale in the dawn light. "Planetary event. The Council's database calls it a thermal inversion storm. Basically, the temperature is about to spike by 40 degrees in the next 20 minutes, and then drop 60 degrees over the following hour." "That's insane," Dante said. But he was already moving, checking their environmental systems. "Our gear isn't rated for that kind of swing." "No one's gear is," Sienna said, pulling up the competitive feed. Teams across the planet were scrambling, some abandoning their shelters to seek natural protection, others hunkering down and hoping their equipment held. This is one of the challenges. The planet itself trying to kill us. The shrieking grew louder, and through their transparent panels, they watched the landscape transform. The bioluminescent plants that had glowed softly through the night suddenly blazed with intense light, as if they were burning from within. The acid mist thickened into a soup that obscured everything beyond 20 meters. And the heat came like a physical wave, turning their shelter into an oven, despite the environmental controls working at maximum capacity. "We need to shut down non-essential systems," Cale said, already rerouting power. "Focus everything on cooling and structural integrity." "The defensive perimeter," Vesper protested. "If we shut that down, we cook," Cale interrupted. "Choose." They shut down the perimeter. The next 20 minutes were brutal. Even with the environmental systems at full power, the temperature inside the shelter climbed past 40 degrees Celsius. Sienna felt sweat soaking through her clothes, her breath coming in short gasps. Beside her, Dante had stripped down to his undershirt, his face flushed with heat. "Talk to me," he said suddenly, his hand finding hers. "Distract me before I start hallucinating." "What should I talk about?" Sienna asked, squeezing his hand back. The physical contact was almost unbearable in the heat, but she didn't let go. "Anything. Tell me. Tell me about the worst date you ever had." Despite everything, Sienna laughed. "Really? That's what you want to know? We might die in the next 5 minutes. I want to know something real about you that isn't about surviving impossible situations." "Fine," Sienna said, searching her memory for something that felt appropriately absurd. 3 years ago, right before the Kepler mission, I went on a date with a guy who spent 2 hours explaining why plants were superior to humans from an evolutionary standpoint. He had charts. "Charts," Dante repeated, and even through the heat, she could hear the smile in his voice. "Extensive charts. With footnotes. He proposed we should all strive to be more photosynthetic." "Did you see him again?" "I took a 6-month mission to another star system, specifically to avoid him." Dante's laugh was hoarse, but genuine. "Your turn. Ask me something." "Why linguistics?" Sienna asked. "Out of everything you could have studied, Why languages? Dante was quiet for a moment, and Sienna thought maybe the heat had become too much for conversation. Then, because words matter. Because the difference between "I will destroy you" and "I will honor you" in some languages is a single syllable, and that one syllable can mean the difference between war and peace, between life and death. His voice dropped. I wanted to be the person who understood those differences, who could bridge gaps between people who couldn't communicate. I thought if I was good enough at it, I could prevent tragedies. And then Isabella died, Sienna said softly. And then I learned that sometimes being good isn't good enough. That words can still fail you, even when you think you understand them perfectly. Sienna shifted so she could see his face. In the brutal heat, with sweat running down his temples and his eyes squeezed shut against the temperature, Dante Volkov looked vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. The humor that he wore like armor had melted away, leaving only raw honesty. I don't think you failed, she said. I think you were dealt an impossible situation, and you did your best, and sometimes that's not enough. Not because you weren't good enough, but because the universe is random and cruel and doesn't care about our best efforts. Dante opened his eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made Sienna's breath catch. Is that what you tell yourself about Kepler 442b? I'm working on believing it, Sienna admitted. Then we'll work on it together, Dante said. And somehow they had moved closer together, despite the heat, despite the fact that touching should have been unbearable. Temperature's peaking, Hale announced, his voice strained. If the models are right, we should start cooling down in 3.2.1. The shrieking stopped. The silence was so sudden and complete that Sienna's ears rang with it. And then, as promised, the temperature began to drop, fast, within minutes. Their shelter went from oven to refrigerator, frost forming on the interior walls as the environmental systems struggled to compensate in the opposite direction. Everyone okay? Sienna asked, forcing herself back into leadership mode, even though part of her wanted to stay in that moment of vulnerability with Dante. Define okay, Vesper muttered. But she was already moving to help Kale reboot their systems. They spent the next hour recovering, bringing their equipment back online and assessing damage. The thermal swing had taken its toll. Several sensors were fried. Their water purification system was working at reduced capacity, and the structural sealant on the shelter had cracked in 3 places. We can fix it, Kale said, though he looked exhausted. But we're going to need materials. The volcanic glass from the ridgeline would work for the sealant, and there's a mineral deposit about half a kilometer north that might have what we need for the sensors. Half a kilometer might as well be half the galaxy right now, Vesper pointed out. Our defenses are compromised. We're all exhausted, and there are still 70 teams out there, plus whatever native predators are feeling hungry. She's right, Sienna said. We can't risk a full team expedition. 2 people, quick extraction mission. In and out before anything notices we're vulnerable. I'll go, Dante said immediately. Not alone, Sienna replied. I'm coming with you. Sienna, Kale started. Non-negotiable. Dante knows what we need. I know the terrain and the threats. We're the logical choice. She met Kale's eyes steadily. You and Vesper hold the shelter. If we're not back in 2 hours, seal up and assume we're not coming back. That's a cheerful thought, Vesper said. But she was already pulling together a supply pack. 20 minutes later, Sienna and Dante stepped out of the shelter into the post-storm landscape. Vexler Prime looked different in the aftermath. The vegetation had retracted into defensive positions, leaving the ground more exposed. The acid mist had cleared slightly, giving them better visibility, but also making them more visible to anything hunting. Stay close, Sienna said, checking her scanner. And keep your weapon ready. They moved quickly through the twisted landscape, following the route Sienna had mapped. The volcanic glass ridge was their first stop, and they worked efficiently to collect the sharp-edged material, wrapping it carefully in protective cloth. "You know," Dante said as they worked, "most first dates don't involve gathering volcanic glass on a death world." Sienna paused. "Is that what this is? A date?" "Well, we're spending quality time together in a romantic hellscape, risking our lives for the good of the group, and I'm pretty sure I'm falling for you despite my better judgment. If that's not dating, I don't know what is." Sienna felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Your timing is terrible." "I've been told that before," Dante agreed. "But in my defense, if I wait for good timing, I might be dead. And I'd really prefer to tell you how I feel while I'm still alive to see your reaction." "My reaction?" Sienna said carefully, securing the last of the volcanic glass. "Is that you're insane?" "This is insane. We're probably both going to die. And," she stopped, taking a breath, "and I'm falling for you two, against all logic and reason and self-preservation instincts." Dante's smile was incandescent. "Well, at least we're being stupid together." "The stupidest," Sienna agreed, and then somehow they were kissing, pressed together in the shadow of an alien ridge with death lurking in every direction. It was brief, desperate, and perfect, a moment of connection in a universe trying very hard to kill them. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante said, "We should probably get the minerals and head back before something eats us." "Probably," Sienna agreed. But she was smiling in a way she hadn't smiled in 3 years. They reached the mineral deposit without incident, gathering what they needed quickly. It was as they were preparing to head back that Sienna's scanner started screaming warnings. "Contact," she said, bringing up her weapon. "Multiple signatures, moving fast. Rift stalkers?" Dante asked, positioning himself back to back with her. "Bigger. More heat output." Sienna's blood ran cold as she checked the readings. "Dracnir. 3 of them, and they're heading right for us." They ran. The Dracnir were faster than they had any right to be for creatures that massive. Sienna could hear them crashing through the vegetation behind them, could hear their communication harsh, guttural sounds that needed no translation to understand as threats. "They're hurting us," Dante gasped as they ran, "pushing us away from the shelter." He was right. Every time they tried to change direction, one of the Dracnir would cut them off, forcing them deeper into unfamiliar territory. Sienna's mind raced, calculating odds and finding them all terrible. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow ravine ahead. "If we can get in there, their size works against them." They dove into the ravine, squeezing through a gap barely wide enough for human shoulders. Behind them, the Dracnir bellowed in frustration, too large to follow. But they weren't giving up. Sienna could hear them splitting up, looking for other ways into the ravine. "We need to keep moving," she said, leading them deeper into the narrow space. The walls pressed close on either side, and above them, the sky was reduced to a thin ribbon of blood-red light. They navigated the ravine for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, always aware of the Dracnir paralleling their movements above. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing and stopped dead. Nerix stood in the center of the clearing, its crystalline form reflecting the strange light in rainbow patterns. The Sharakai regarded them with those violet ice-chip eyes, head tilted in that gesture of curiosity Sienna remembered from their first meeting. "Humans," Nerix said. "You are being hunted." "We noticed," Dante replied, positioning himself slightly in front of Sienna. "Are you here to join them? Or ... "I am here because I am curious," Nerix said. "The Dracnir hunt you because they are cruel and you are weak. But you do not flee like prey. You flee like predators who have chosen a tactical retreat. This interests me. Fascinating, Sienna said. But we don't have time for philosophical discussions. Those Draknir are going to find a way down here any minute. Yes, Nerix agreed. Which is why I offer you a choice. I can let you pass through my territory unmolested, or I can help you turn the hunters into the hunted. What would humans choose? Sienna met Dante's eyes, saw her own thoughts reflected there. They could run, try to make it back to the shelter, and hope the Draknir gave up. Or they could take a stand, with the help of one of the galaxy's most dangerous species. What do you get out of helping us? Sienna asked. Entertainment, Nerix said simply. And data. I wish to see what humans do when cornered. Your species is an unknown variable. I would understand you better. We're not lab rats, Dante said tightly. No, Nerix agreed. You are competitors. As MI and I have decided that humans surviving would be more interesting than humans dying. The universe has enough death. It has precious little surprise. A crash behind them announced that the Draknir had found an entrance to the ravine. Sienna made the decision in a heartbeat. Help us. And if we survive this, we'll owe you one. Debts are meaningful, Nerix said, sounding pleased. Very well. Follow my lead and do exactly as I instruct. What followed was the strangest combat experience of Sienna's life. Nerix positioned them at a narrow point in the ravine, where the Draknir would have to come at them one at a time. The Sharakai itself took a position above, perched on the ravine wall with impossible grace. When the first Draknir came around the corner, Nerix dropped onto it from above. The crystalline being moved like liquid lightning, striking pressure points on the massive creature's armored body with surgical precision. The Draknir roared and thrashed, but Nerix was already gone, flowing up the wall again. Legs, Nerix called down. Strike at the joints. Even armor must bend. Sienna and Dante opened fire, targeting the joints in the Draknir's leg armor, just as Nerix had indicated. The creature stumbled, and that moment of imbalance was all Nerix needed. The Sharakai struck again, this time at the base of the Draknir's skull, and the massive creature went down hard. The second and third Draknir, seeing their companion fall, retreated with surprising speed. Apparently, humans weren't worth dying for. They will not return today, Nerix said, dropping lightly to the ground. You fought well. For humans. Thank you, Sienna said, trying to catch her breath. For helping us. Thank you for being interesting, Nerix replied. I will remember this debt. When the time comes that you need aid again, call for Nerix of the Ice Gardens. I will answer. The Sharakai turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The Council watches all competitors, but they watch humans most closely. You are the anomaly in their calculations. They do not know if you are a mistake or a revelation. Show them revelation, Sienna Hayes. The galaxy could use more surprises. With that, Nerix flowed away into the ravine, leaving Sienna and Dante alone with an unconscious Draknir and 1,000 questions. Did that really just happen? Dante asked. I think so, Sienna replied. Now let's get back before something else decides we're interesting. They made it back to the shelter, just as their 2-hour deadline expired. Kale and Vesper rushed to help them inside, relief evident on both faces. We were about to seal up, Vesper said. What happened? You're both covered in... Is that Draknir blood? Long story, Sienna said, setting down their collected materials. But we got what we needed. And we made an ally. Sort of, as they worked to repair the shelter. Sienna found herself constantly aware of Dante, the way he moved, the sound of his voice. The fact that they had kissed in the middle of a death world, and somehow both survived. When their hands brushed while passing tools, she felt electricity that had nothing to do with Vexler Prime's atmospheric conditions. That night, After Kale and Vesper had fallen asleep, Sienna found Dante on watch again. She settled beside him without a word, and he immediately took her hand. "So," he said quietly. "We kissed." "We did," Sienna confirmed. "And then we fought off alien dinosaurs with the help of a crystalline ice warrior. That also happened. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't hallucinating." Dante turned to look at her. "Where does this go, Sienna? When this is over, if we survive, what happens to us?" Sienna had been asking herself the same question. "Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if there is an us beyond survival instinct and shared trauma. But I'd like to find out." "Me too," Dante said. "Though I have to warn you, I'm a terrible boyfriend. I make bad jokes at inappropriate times. I'm obsessive about my work. And I have a tendency to blame myself for things that aren't my fault. And I'm emotionally closed off. I prioritize mission success over personal relationships. And I haven't actually dated anyone seriously since before Kepler 442b, Sienna replied. "We're going to be a disaster." "The best kind of disaster," Dante agreed, and kissed her again. Soft and sweet and full of promise. They sat together through the watch, talking about everything and nothing, childhoods and dreams, fears and hopes, all the things that made them human rather than just survivors. And when Vesper woke to take the next watch, she found them asleep against each other, hands still intertwined. "About time," Vesper whispered, smiling as she covered them with a thermal blanket. Outside, Vexillor Prime continued its attempt to kill everything on its surface. But inside the shelter, 4 humans slept, exhausted but alive, held together by friendship and determination and the first fragile threads of something that might. Against all odds, beloved, the galaxy had invited humans to prove themselves. And Sienna Hayes was beginning to think that maybe the greatest proof wasn't just survival, but the ability to find connection and hope even in the darkest places. 3 days down. 4 to go.